Hi, this is going to be the first video that I edited on this channel. I'm editing for experimental purposes. Basically, I want to see if it helps me teach better. So what I have here are several files of endgame positions, which I believe are super important. To preface, endgames are important in Horde because maybe a number of reasons. For example, they help you evaluate a middle game position that maybe you can simplify to an endgame. Secondly, it's very important to win positions that you deserve to win, and this helps you do it by heart. Finally, I think it will be good practice in terms of, developing your logical train of thought or your thought process that goes when you play a Horde game. Let me pull up the first position. So, White has a bunch of pawns on two files, so he has a two-pawn pillar, a two-pawn thick pillar. So, this position is a draw because the pawns cannot promote, but it's going to be stalemate. For example, after f6, Black should wait between these two queening squares. So, if we go ahead and ask, okay, let's say f5. If we go ahead and ask as Black, what is White's idea? I can't flip the board. No big deal. What is White's idea? Maybe to try to promote a pawn, but not really possible, by the way. What are the weaknesses is a second question you can ask. The weaknesses are the two queening squares, e8 and f8. And then 3, what is the worst piece? Not relevant to this position. Okay, so we get that the weaknesses are these two queening squares, so all Black has to do is safeguard those queening squares. So just shuffle back and forth, and then after the pawn moves, okay, you can go to f7 because you still cover the queening squares. And now if he pushes check, it's very important that you keep an eye on the queening squares and not take the pawn, because then White promotes. So after king e8, it will be a draw after e5 stalemate, because Black has no legal moves. If White pushes the pawn to f7, we just take the pawn and get a similar kind of scenario. White can still make the draw. This would be another stalemate. So yeah, it's a draw. A very simple draw. This is what I call building block that forms the basis for understanding all the other endgame positions that I'm going to show. For this next example, this is a win for Black because White has only 3 pawns and cannot form a stalemate. So again, the weaknesses are the two queening squares, so Black just has to keep an eye on them. So f6, king f8, now after e7, it's a critical moment because after king e8, it would be a stalemate after e6, and therefore a draw. However, Black has this move, king f7, forcing a win, because after e6, king e8, White is in Zugzwang because he has to push f7, king takes e7, f8 queen, and then we take the material. And if White tries e8 queen, then we just take, keep an eye on the queening square, and then it's going to be an easy win. I guess the principle for this position, okay, what is White's idea? Well, the king is in check, so... But also, the idea is to try to form a stalemate, right? But luckily, white creates a weakness, which is the f7 square that we can use, while keeping an eye on the queening squares, so it should win for black. Now this position is the same as this first one, except black has a pawn. This is an easy win for black because all he has to do is make waiting moves with the pawns, so a5, a4, a3, a2. He can make any piece he wants, it doesn't matter. A queen, let's say. Now f7, take, f6, king f8, f5, make a waiting move, f4, another waiting move, and repeat the process. So yeah, you don't even have to take the material with the queen. And then this will win, because we can just keep making waiting moves. Alright, now this next position is also similar to the first position. Basically, white has a 3 thick pawn column, but the rook paralyzes one of the files, so the rook is playing against these 4 pawns. Nonetheless, it is actually a win for white, not a draw, because white can forcibly fork the king and the rook. So basically, the way he would do this is something like, okay, he can start out with d7 check, and let's say king e7, d6, forcing king d8, and now something like d5. All of a sudden, the f6 rook is in Zugzwang. It cannot move to h6 because of e5, and now we push f6. And if it moves to f8, then we can fork the king and the rook. So it's a trivial win. For this next example, it's the same except black has a pawn. With this extra pawn, it's easily winning for black, because now black can make waiting moves, which means he won't be in Zugzwang, well, when the king is stuck on d8 and the rook is stuck on f6. The thing is that the king and rook are actually very well placed on those squares as long as they get to stay there, so black can make waiting moves with the pawns. So d7, okay, king anywhere, d6, and then just push the pawn. Very simple. And now white is in Zugzwang. Make a queen if you want. Okay, e4. And now at this point we don't even need the pawn, but that's what happens. Very simple winning conversion from this point on. Just control the 2 queening squares, that's it, and make waiting moves. Alright, now this position I thought is pretty interesting because it's hard for somebody to evaluate at first. It's a win for white. So the method for white is to overload the queen. Basically, we can create a stalemating configuration with the king, and then once black takes a pawn, we can give check to the king, which frees him so that we can win the game. I don't know if that explanation makes sense, but let's just play it out. Let's start b5, queen b8, b4, b3, h5, h4, h3, h7, king goes to the corner. I don't know why it's not letting me bring it to the corner, that was weird. Okay, and now the next task, so we put the king in Zugzwang. Now we basically do the same for the queen. And now if the queen moves anywhere like here, then we win easily. Black might think he's clever because he can, or she can take the a7 pawn, exploiting the fact that if I take back right away, then it's a stalemate, it's a draw. However, this is where we play g7, because now the king is liberated and we can take the free material and win very easily. Just make them both stuck on one queening square, and then, well, the queen will be in Zugzwang and the king will be in a stalemating position. Alright, final example. The same except with the pawn. Now this is winning very easily for black because after the queen is put into Zugzwang and the king is put into a stalemate position, all black has to do is just march the pawns. So again, it's not letting me move the king to h8. I don't know why. But let's just say something like this. Now we push the pawn. We can promote to any piece we want, it doesn't matter. Just keep it around to make waiting moves with. And now white is in Zugzwang because he has to give up all these pawns. And all these pawns. So just control the queening squares with the queen and the king, and when you run out of moves, just move your knight somewhere. Very simple. Yeah, you can do that if you want because queen covers it, but in general, always move the piece back to keep an eye on the queening square. And that's it. Simple win. Alright, so that concludes this whole lesson. Maybe we can draw some sort of principle. Number 1, always have an extra piece to make a waiting move with. In the examples I used, I had like pawns, right? Number 2, if white has more than 3 pawns on a too thick pillar and black has nothing but a king, then it should draw. For example, if white has a pawn on f5, like 4 pawns total, then I think it should draw. I'm just going to verify that myself. Custom position and add a pawn. Let's test it. I think this is a draw. So, okay, black has to move. Okay, e7, king e8, and this would stalemate. And, if he goes here, then he wins because now I'm in Zugzwang. Yeah. Okay, so what has to happen is I have to push the correct pawn, so e7 is a blunder. But I'm wrong. I must be wrong. I think this is a win for black. So he can put me in Zugzwang again, right? Okay, I'm wrong. So this would also lose for white. Yeah, I guess so. But if we put a pawn like 1 square behind like this, then I know for a fact white wins, or is a draw. I know for a fact it's a draw because after this sequence, all he has to do is push the pawn to make a waiting move. So, some general principles are waiting resources are extremely valuable for both colors. The more material you have with white, the higher likelihood that you will have resources to make waiting moves with. For black, if you have extra material to make waiting moves with, then you should win very easily. So yeah, that's the principle. So waiting moves are extremely valuable for both colors. Alright, I think that's all I have for this lesson, and feel free to give me any feedback. Thank you. I hope this helps.